Welcome to my channel, where your adventure into the future starts right now. Step into a vibrant universe filled with groundbreaking technology, breathtaking alien landscapes, and exhilarating sci-fi narratives that challenge your imagination. From daring explorations of distant galaxies to haunting journeys through dystopian societies, we uncover the most captivating stories and innovative ideas that will shape the world of tomorrow. Subscribe today and join us on an incredible intergalactic voyage that promises to inspire and thrill. In the ancient and boundless expanse of the galaxy, there existed countless worlds, each home to diverse species with histories as varied as the stars themselves. Some planets were quiet and peaceful, their inhabitants content in their steady, rhythmic existence. Others were fierce battlegrounds, where species fought for dominance or survival in a constant cycle of conflict. But in the great narrative of the galaxy, there was one story that stood out above all others. It was the story of the Deathworlders, the most dangerous and unpredictable of all species, and the day they stopped playing nice. The Deathworlders were not a single species, but a title given to a particular type of creature, one that had evolved on worlds where survival was the ultimate test of strength and resilience. These were planets with environments so hostile, so unforgiving, that only the most adaptable and fierce life forms could survive. From dense jungles filled with predatory beasts to frozen wastelands where the air itself could freeze your breath in an instant, Deathworlders had been forged in the crucible of constant danger. To survive on these planets required more than just physical prowess. It required cunning, ingenuity, and an innate understanding of the fragility of life. And the Deathworlders understood that fragility better than anyone. But when they began to spread beyond their home systems, they caught the attention of the more established galactic civilizations, who initially saw them as a curiosity, perhaps even a threat. The Deathworlders' early interactions with other species were relatively peaceful, though not without tension. They often took the form of short exchanges, trade deals, diplomatic missions, and attempts at communication. The Deathworlders didn't easily trust others, nor did they offer the warmth of friendship to those they encountered. However, they were not overtly hostile, and they seemed content to coexist, if not thrive, in a universe filled with millions of other species. To the more advanced civilizations, the Deathworlders were seen as a curiosity, primitive, dangerous, but not actively malicious. Some of the galaxy's more powerful empires took advantage of the Deathworlders' isolation and fragility, offering them opportunities for trade or alliance, all the while underestimating the true nature of the beings they were dealing with. It wasn't that the Deathworlders lacked the capability to dominate. They could, and had, wiped out entire ecosystems and even civilizations on their own planets, but they preferred a more measured approach. For centuries, they played the game of diplomacy, trading resources, establishing mutual alliances, and tolerating the arrogant and often disrespectful behaviors of other species. They did this because the Deathworlders had an unspoken understanding of something that other species didn't. Power, when used recklessly, can be exhausting, and sometimes the best way to establish authority is to remain silent and observe. They didn't need to constantly prove their strength. They were waiting, watching, biding their time. The galaxy was filled with endless political struggles, intrigue, and empire building, and the Deathworlders had seen it all before. They understood the cycles of war and peace, the rise and fall of civilizations. They knew that true power was not always in brute force, but in patience and the ability to strike when least expected. However, everything changed one fateful day, a day that every species across the galaxy would remember and never forget. It began with a simple diplomatic mission a routine visit between two factions, one of which was led by a collective of Deathworlders. They had agreed to meet with a highly advanced, technologically superior civilization known as the Zithrians, a species whose empire spanned hundreds of worlds. The Zithrians were a proud, intellectually superior race, their technological advancements leagues beyond those of any species the Deathworlders had encountered before. The Zithrians had grown accustomed to power, had basked in their invincibility for centuries, and they were known for their haughty and dismissive attitude towards species they considered inferior. When the Deathworlders arrived on Zithria, the capital world of the Zithrian Empire, they were greeted with an air of condescension. The Zithrians, as was their custom, did not make any real effort to understand the cultures or behaviors of lesser species. Instead, they saw their presence as an opportunity to establish their dominance, attempting to mock the Deathworlders in subtle ways. It began with little things, gestures of insult disguised as politeness, a slight to their intelligence masked as friendly conversation, and an overall sense that the Deathworlders were being treated as inferior. The Deathworlders, however, did not immediately react. They listened carefully, their eyes sharp, their minds calculating the best course of action. The Deathworlders were not easily provoked. They had faced far worse insults in their own brutal environments. They had endured the trials of life on hostile planets, where every breath, every step could be their last. The Zithrians' petty insults seemed almost laughable by comparison. But what the Zithrians failed to recognize was that the Deathworlders did not need to respond immediately. They had learned patience, and patience, as it turned out, was a far deadlier weapon than any laser cannon or bomb. The situation escalated on the third day of the diplomatic summit. A Zithrian official, known for his arrogance, attempted to humiliate one of the Deathworlders, an ambassador from the fierce predator species known as the Krivans. The Zithrian made an overtly insulting comment, accompanied by a demeaning gesture, one that was meant to reinforce their supposed superiority. The Krivans, a species with carnivorous tendencies, stood silently. But the room's atmosphere shifted. The subtle smile that had once adorned the faces of the Deathworlders was replaced with a cold, calculating gaze. It was then that the world changed. The Krivans, known for their brutal combat skills honed through millennia of surviving their death world, did not retaliate with words or even violent threats. They acted with swift, deliberate force. Without warning, the Zithrian official who had insulted them was on the ground, his body twisted in an unnatural way, his face pale from the sheer force of the Krivan's grip. The room fell into stunned silence. The Zithrians, who had believed themselves untouchable, looked on in disbelief as the Deathworlders, without a word, began to leave the room. They had made their point not through violence alone, but through the quiet, brutal efficiency that came from living in environments that could, and often did, kill on a whim. In their worlds, there was no time for arrogance. There was only survival. And in that moment, they had shown the Zithrians exactly what it meant to survive. The news of what had transpired spread like wildfire across the galaxy. The Deathworlders, who had been content to let others believe they were docile and peaceful, had finally shed the mantle of appeasement. The galaxy trembled. For the first time in recorded history, an entire alliance of species known for their peaceful, diplomatic nature had unleashed their ferocity in a way no one could ignore. The Deathworlders were not to be trifled with. They had reached their breaking point, and they had made their message clear. From that day forward, no one would dare underestimate the Deathworlders again. Their patience had been a long game, but now they were no longer willing to play by anyone's rules but their own. Species across the galaxy, once confident in their superiority, suddenly realized the error of their assumptions. The Deathworlders had spent centuries watching, waiting, and learning the intricacies of galactic politics and diplomacy. Now, the tables had turned. The Deathworlders no longer hesitated to assert their dominance, and every species in the galaxy, from the most humble merchant fleets to the mightiest empires, understood that crossing the Deathworlders could mean death swift, precise, and unforgiving. The galaxy soon learned that the Deathworlders' ability to adapt was not just limited to their survival on their brutal homeworlds. It extended to their interactions with other species. They could outthink, outmaneuver, and overpower anyone who underestimated them. The Deathworlders no longer sought alliances out of necessity, they now used them to their advantage, shifting power dynamics and manipulating galactic politics with the same ease they had once shown in their own environments. Empires that once dismissed the Deathworlders as nothing more than a threat to be dealt with now found themselves aligning with them or, in some cases, falling before them. The Zithrians, who had believed themselves to be beyond reproach, were forced to make reparations for their arrogance. Other species, seeing what had happened to the Zithrians, quickly learned that the Deathworlders were not creatures to be trifled with. They were a living legend, a force of nature whose survival instincts had shaped them into the most formidable players in the galactic game. And so, the legend of the day the Deathworlders stopped playing nice, spread across the stars, etched into the history of every species who had ever encountered them. The day they had finally shown their true nature became a story told in hushed tones across the galaxy, a reminder of the raw, unyielding power that could come from a species who had survived on the most inhospitable worlds imaginable. The Deathworlders had proven that sometimes the most dangerous thing in the galaxy was not the one who roared the loudest, but the one who waited, watching patiently, until it was time to strike. It was a lesson every species remembered, and one that no one would ever forget. The Deathworlders had stopped playing nice, and the galaxy would never be the same again.